In a fire station in Livermore, California, there is a light bulb that has been switched on since 1901. Not a replica, not a reproduction. The same bulb, the same filament, still glowing above the fire engines, 125 years later. Guinness has certified it as the oldest working light bulb on Earth, and even General Electric has acknowledged it. You can drive to 4550 East Avenue and look at it yourself. So here's the obvious question. How? But that's not actually the interesting question. Because if a bulb built in the 1890s can burn for 125 years, the real question is about the one in your hallway. Why does yours die in a year? And you probably assume you know the answer. Old technology was crude. Things got better, cheaper to make, cheaper to buy, and if it burns out, you spend $2 and move on. That's just progress, except that's backwards. The bulb didn't get better, it got worse, and it got worse on purpose. First, the bulb itself. It was made by the Shelby Electric Company in Shelby, Ohio, in the late 1890s. Hand-blown glass, a carbon filament, not tungsten. It was designed by a French engineer named Adolphe Chaillet. Chaillet was, by every account, obsessed with the filament, and Shelby bulbs developed a reputation for simply refusing to die. That one was donated to the Livermore Fire Department in 1901. It's been in the care of the fire crews ever since. It has moved buildings a few times. It's been switched off for a handful of brief moments in 125 years, and that's it. It started as a 60-watt bulb. It's dimmed a lot since. It now puts out about as much light as a 4-watt nightlight, but it is still technically on now. Nobody is claiming every bulb from 1900 lasted a century. This one is a genuine freak. It's low wattage, it almost never gets switched off, and being switched on and off is what kills filaments. But here's the part that matters. In 1924, the ordinary household bulb was already good, really good. Burning times of 2,000 hours were normal. Some were reaching 2,500. Engineers had spent 40 years making the filament last longer, and they were winning. So why would anyone want to undo that? Because being a light bulb manufacturer in the 1920s was miserable. Electrification was spreading fast, and there were suddenly bicycle lamps, car headlights, street lights, a whole new world to sell into. Thousands of companies piled in, and not one of them could count on selling the same number of bulbs 2 years running. That was true for a workshop in a back room, and it was true for the giants with factories on 3 continents. Right before the cartel formed, Osram watched its German sales fall off a cliff. So the problem they set out to solve wasn't really about quality or standards. They didn't just want to fix the price of a light bulb, they wanted to fix how often you had to buy one. And then, in December of 1924, a group of men met in Geneva. They were the heads of the world's biggest light bulb manufacturers. Osram from Germany, Philips from the Netherlands, Compagnie des Lampes from France, General Electric from the United States, Tokyo Electric from Japan. On the 15th of January 1925, they formally signed an agreement. They called it Phoebus. On paper, Phoebus was about standards, shared testing, sensible quality benchmarks, carving up who sold where, and one of those standards was the lifespan of a household light bulb. They set it at 1,000 hours, read that again. The bulbs were lasting 2,000 hours, some 2,500, and the standard they agreed on was 1,000. They didn't cap the maximum. They set a target, and they enforced it in both directions. Because here's the mechanism, and it's the thing almost nobody knows. Every factory bound by that agreement had to regularly ship samples of its own bulbs to a central testing laboratory in Switzerland. And there were hundreds of those factories, including all of General Electric's licensees around the world. The lab burned them, timed them, and if your bulbs lasted longer than the agreed lifespan, you were fined. Not for making them badly, for making them too well. There is a table from 1929 that lists exactly what you owed in Swiss francs, based on how many hours over the line your bulbs went. The further past 1,000 hours your product survived, the more you paid. 40 years of engineers trying to make the filament last longer, then a committee and a fine schedule to walk it all back. And this is the part that's easy to skate past. Making a bad light bulb is trivial. Anybody can make a bad light bulb. Use a cheap filament, rush the vacuum, and it dies in a week. That's not what they did. They built a bulb that reliably died at 1,000 hours. Not 400, not 900. Roughly 1,000 every time, from hundreds of different factories. That's a genuinely hard engineering problem, and it took them years. Filament thickness, voltage, current. All the same knobs their researchers had spent 40 years turning in the opposite direction. Now turned back. And they knew exactly what they were doing. Anton Phillips, the head of Philips, wrote this to another cartel executive. After the very strenuous efforts we made to emerge from a period of long-life lamps, it is of the greatest importance that we do not sink back into the same mire by paying no attention to voltages and supplying lamps that will have a very prolonged life. A period of long-life lamps. The mire. Long-lasting light bulbs were the swamp. Getting out of it was the achievement. And it worked. In 1927, Tokyo Electric sent the cartel a memo noting that after shortening the life of its bulbs, sales had jumped. Of course they had. A bulb that lasts 1,000 hours instead of 2,000 sells twice as often to exactly the same customer. Now, to be fair to them, they did have an argument. There's a real physical trade-off inside a light bulb. Run the filament hotter, and you get more light and more light per watt of electricity. You also burn the filament out faster. Life and brightness genuinely do pull against each other. That isn't cartel propaganda, it's physics. And the cartel leaned on it. Their bulbs, they said, were higher quality, more efficient, brighter. Which was partly true. Their bulbs also cost considerably more. Even now, regulators in the UK and some independent engineers will tell you a shorter life bulb can be brighter for the same wattage. So they had a cover story, and it was a plausible one. The trouble is what they wrote to each other when they thought nobody was reading. A trade-off doesn't need a fine schedule. Physics doesn't need a laboratory in Switzerland checking whether you cheated by building something that lasted too long. Phoebus was supposed to run until 1955. It didn't. The Second World War made it impossible for the members to coordinate, and the agreement collapsed around 1939 and 1940. But it didn't disappear quietly. In 1949, the United States District Court for the District of New Jersey found that General Electric had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act, and its role in the Phoebus cartel was part of the reason. The cartel is gone. What it invented is not. Because Phoebus is the moment-planned obsolescence, stops being an accident and becomes a strategy. A product deliberately built to fail on schedule, so the customer has to come back. It isn't a defect. It's a line on a spreadsheet. Now be careful here, because this is where this story usually gets stretched too far. There is no modern light bulb cartel. Nobody has found a Swiss lab finding companies for building phones that last. And there are real, honest engineering reasons a cheap bulb dies sooner than an expensive one. But once an industry has learned that a shorter life means more sales, you don't need a conspiracy. You just need everyone to notice the same thing. Which brings us back to Livermore. That bulb has now been burning for 125 years. It has outlived Adolphe Chaillet, who designed it. It has outlived the Shelby Electric Company, which made it. It has outlived every single man who sat in that room in Geneva, and the agreement they signed, and the cartel they built to make sure nothing like it ever got made again. They fined factories in Swiss francs to stop bulbs like that one existing. And it's still on tonight.